Once again, we're returning to the American side of Train Sim World add-ons, with today's subject being a route from Skyhook Games. For the longest time, I held back from buying Horseshoe Curve because I was skeptical over its quality, or possible lack thereof, but I'm sorry to say that curiosity got the better of me. Skyhook released their Horseshoe Curve route in April 2022, and it is still available to buy on Steam as of early November 2025. $43.59 is the full price for the version compatible with TSW6, but I only paid $17.43 for my copy because it was 60% off in the 2025 Steam Autumn Sale. The route coverage runs for 40 miles, or 64 kilometers, from Altoona at the eastern end to Johnstown at the western end. This is essentially a remake of the old Horseshoe Curve route in Train Simulator Classic, albeit with the addition of the branch from South Fork to Windber Mine, which adds another 18 miles, or 29 kilometers, to the route coverage. On the motive power scene, the base route only includes 2 diesel locomotives from Norfolk Southern's fleet, namely the General Electric ES44AC and EMD GP38-2. The former was a new addition to TSW at the time, while we already had the GP38-2 in previous add-ons, but those were in CSX, Union Pacific, and Canadian National variants. Those earlier variants are included with Sandpatch Grade, Peninsula Corridor, and a CN Oakville subdivision respectively. Much like Sherman Hill, Horseshoe Curve has only had one post-release DLC so far, in the form of another Heritage Unit gameplay pack. This one was released in August 2023, features all but one of Norfolk Southern's ES44AC Heritage Units, and costs a staggering $22 New Zealand dollars at full price. As for why 8098, the Conrail engine, wasn't included, I heard it was down to licensing issues, but don't quote me on that. Come to think of it, I'm confused as to why the SD70ACE Heritage units were not included as well, considering the fact that an SD70ACE model was already in TSW as part of the Sherman Hill route. The Heritage units look fine, for the most part, but personally, I think the shade of blue on 8103 looks a little too bright, and the pinstriping on 8102 looks more like yellow when it should be gold. Your mileage may vary, but whenever I've run a service or spawned on foot in timetable mode, at no point have I ever seen one of the Heritage units on an AI service or parked in a siding. The Gevos that did appear were always in the standard NS Thoroughbred Black. Here's something I noticed when driving the ES44AC. The reverser lever moves smoothly, but the throttle does not. Instead, it makes an awkward jump from one notch to the next. It's a similar story with the independent brake lever, which moves smoothly between the full application and release settings, but awkwardly jumps from release to bail off. As for the automatic brake, this might be the most inconsistent of the levers, jolting from release to minimum application, then moving smoothly between minimum application and full service, before jolting again through suppression, handle off, and emergency. Incidentally, Skyhook missed a trick by not including the SD40E, or any other NS rebuilds, with the base route. I bring up the SD40E in particular because those things were used on banker duties out of Altoona. In real life, there is also an Amtrak service running along the Altoona to Johnstown section. The service is known as the Pennsylvanian, and runs from New York City to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, we still haven't got a General Electric P42DC Genesis as an official TSW add-on, despite the fact that she's been a highly requested locomotive for as long as I can remember, so the in-game rail scene on Horseshoe Curve is left in an unrealistic state with only freight trains present. There are numerous routes on which the P42DC would be useful, such as Horseshoe Curve, MBTA Commuter, Cajon Pass, and a Sandpatch grade. She could also be used as an AI-only layer out of Los Angeles Union Station, to which you can pay a visit on the Antelope Valley and San Bernardino routes. I am aware of the P42DC on which SpaceyCat is working, but as far as I know, that'll be a PC-only mod, in which case console players will still have an unrealistic freight-only rail scene on the Altoona to Johnstown route, not to mention Cajon Pass and the other routes that I mentioned earlier. All the more reason for Dovetail to make their own P42DC. Alternatively, I can imagine SpaceyCat's mod eventually being released as an official add-on if it's of a sufficiently high quality. Technically, you get a third locomotive with Horseshoe Curve, but only as a really basic static model. This is EMD GP9 number 7048, built in 1955, and she is a static exhibit at the famous curve itself, sitting in a spot previously occupied by K4 Pacific number 1361, who was moved away for restoration in 1985, and was presumably painted purple and sent to the Isle of Sodor. Now that I think about it, I have a feeling that Heritage Unit 8102 and the static model of 7048 could be the closest we ever get to any proper Pennsylvania Railroad era content in TSW, although I would love to be proven wrong eventually. It would have been nice to get a Steam era version of Horseshoe Curve, although I'm not sure what locomotives would be appropriate for the line in that era, aside from the K4. Another Pennsy steamer that I'd like to see in TSW is the Q2 Duplex. One thing of which I was wary prior to purchasing this route was the locomotive audio. Previously, I had heard reports of the ES44AC's horn and prime mover barely sounding like the real thing, and based on what I've experienced in the game for myself, I don't think those reports are baseless. I swear there's a 1 or 2 second delay between pressing the spacebar and actually hearing the horn. I may not be an expert on the GEVOs, but even with that in mind, I think the default prime mover sounds on the NS ES44AC are terrible. To my ears, the ruddy thing sounds more like a Salzer engine, the sort of thing you'd hear on a Class 45 Peak, than anything with a General Electric prime mover. Sure, there are sound mods available to improve the locomotives, not just the GEVO, but also the GP38-2, but they should have been as good as they are in the modded condition right at the start. I sympathise with any console players who own Horseshoe Curve, since they're stuck with the poor default sounds. As for timetable mode, this is even more Spartan than it is on Sherman Hill, because you only get 9 playable services for the GP38-2 and 68 for the ES44AC. The Heritage units also come with 6 scenarios, on top of the 5 already included in the base route, but they do not add any additional services to timetable mode. Instead, they merely substitute into the existing GEVO services. According to the service selection list, it takes an average of 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete a full run of this route, and to my surprise, there are no helper services in the timetable. As you're driving along from Altoona to Johnstown, or vice versa, Some notable landmarks to look out for are the Horseshoe Curve itself, which has been a popular railfan hangout for many years, as well as the Allegheny Tunnels at Gallitzin and the Banker Station at Cresson. I don't know about you, but personally, I find the densely forested hills of Pennsylvania more visually appealing than the wide open plains of Wyoming. The Harry Bennett Memorial Roundhouse is located right next to Altoona's Amtrak station, and some static rolling stock has been modelled here in-game, but there is an invisible wall preventing you from walking right up to the turntable and rolling stock. Meanwhile, there's another invisible wall over at Juniata Shops, which prevents you from walking right up to the locomotives parked outside the shops, and there's yet another invisible wall at Altoona Station. This one in particular didn't make any sense to me. I was surprised to discover that, in real life, there's a little funicular at the Horseshoe Curve itself. The funicular has been modelled in-game, but the vehicles are not functional, nor can you step inside. Elsewhere at the site, there's this information board, but the resolution is so low that one can barely read the text, even when I'm wearing glasses. Incidentally, has anyone else noticed that illustration of the P42DC that has the incorrect wheel arrangement? Although I found the scenery on Horseshoe Curve more interesting than Sherman Hill, it is still looking a bit dated by today's standards, and I did not think HSC was a particularly interesting route to drive on, even if mainly because of the Spartan timetable, which resulted in the route feeling boring and lifeless with not many trains about. It didn't help that, even with 3 locomotives on the head end and another 2 at the back, my tanker train was crawling at around 20 miles per hour for most, if not all, of the steep climb out of Altoona, round the Horseshoe Curve itself, and up to the tunnels at Gallitzin. Another thing worth mentioning is the lack of shunting services, a common problem on US freight routes in TSW, or passenger-focused US routes that happen to run past some local industries. In numerous cases, there are yards or local industry spurs that sit there untouched, without referencing the Veronicas, or some wagons are parked there, but they never move, because no services were provided for them in the timetable. Boston Sprinter is a good example of what I'm talking about. Incidentally, throughout my entire journey from Altoona to Johnstown with 8105 up front, I only saw 3 trains going the other way, and all of those meets were west of Cresson. I can still see potential for interesting Norfolk Southern related content in Train Sim World, and it's a shame that, what is currently, the railroad's only representation in the game comes in the form of a route that's not particularly long, complete with a very Spartan timetable and poor quality default sounds on the included locomotives. The absence of Amtrak rolling stock doesn't help the situation. If you ask me, I think Saluda Grade in North Carolina, or West Brownsville to Bailey Mine in Pennsylvania, would have been nice to see in TSW, not to mention all of the fascinating rebuilt locomotives like the AC44C6M, SD70ACC, SD60E, GP38-2, AC44C6CF, and the previously mentioned SD40E. Personally, I find the Horseshoe Curve route to be more enjoyable than Sherman Hill, but as for where I'd rate Skyhook's route, I still think it only deserves a 5 out of 10, and I can't decide on whether or not I would recommend it to other TSW players. The only Skyhook route that I can confidently recommend is the Midland line, Leicester to Derby and Nottingham. Speaking of which, after the ending joke, I'll leave you with a scene recorded on the Midland main line, when the timing worked out much better than I was expecting. If you've stuck around watching through to the end, you win an Australian cartoon dog that recently performed a cover of I Want a New Drug. It's Bluey Lewis,